between the Orleans Pond Coalition and the Orleans Marine and Freshwater Quality Task Force. The project is to restore the health of Bowling Pond, a 4.7-acre freshwater pond in the heart of Orleans. OPC is a nonprofit organization of 700 members, organized over 10 years ago to protect and preserve Orleans saltwater estuaries and freshwater ponds and lakes. It has sponsored many projects in keeping with that mission. We have an oyster restoration project, school scholarships for environmental excellence, Muttnitz, and celebrating its 5th anniversary, Celebrate Our Waters, and that's just to name a few. The 7-member Orleans Marine and Freshwater Quality Task Force is appointed by the Board of Selectmen to protect the town's salt and freshwater bodies. It identifies problem areas and recommends action to improve the quality of Orleans waters. So far, this project has been months in preparation, and we're just at the very beginning. This launch meeting is an important first step. Its purpose is to define the problems for you, explain a bit of the science, and to bring the Bowling Pond watershed community together to ask questions and share your views and your concerns. The Bowling Pond project is a first for us. To understand the ways in which the stormwater and other factors in fertilizer are degrading our waters, and to learn lessons that can be applied to other ponds in the future. Residents and businesses in the Bowling Pond watershed have a right to know what's going on in their backyards. And after the presentation, we invite you to ask questions and share your views with us. But first, I'd like to introduce you to a few people that may help us along the way. Leaders from town and other nonprofit organizations. If you would just stand up when I announce your name, I would appreciate it, so that people from the Bowling Pond area can see who you are and ask you questions after the meeting. Judith Bruce, Judith Brainerd, Steve Phillips. These are from the Orleans Conservation Commission. We have Dan Connolly from the Orleans Tree Board. We have Tom Daly, Orleans Director of Public Works and Natural Resources. Alan McLennan, Board of Selectmen. Chris Ramsey, Orleans Conservation Trust. Steve Bornemeyer and Chet Crabtree from the Planning Board. Paul Richard, I don't see, is Paul here? Paul Richards from the Nauset Middle School Facilities Manager. Joining us later will be Maxine Minkoff, the Nauset Middle School Principal, and John Sim, the Environmental Teacher. We have pleased the people who are in the businesses and who live around Bowling Pond, so we can see how many of you are here.
Who's there?
Okay. From the Orleans Pond Protection Committee, Orleans Pond Coalition Protection Committee, we have Sandy Bain, the chair. We have Sam Corlett.
Sam is not here.
Okay. Rigney Cunningham. Judith Hunt. Hank Schumacher. And Larry is in Vermont. Okay.
Because she's doing multiple duties, we don't have Carolyn on that list, but she's on there.
Carolyn. Carolyn Kennedy is also on this list. And we'll be announcing her for other things too in the future here. Let's see. We have other OPC Bowling Pond sampling volunteers. These are people who are volunteered to sample the waters in Bowling Pond at various times. We have Carolyn Kennedy, Judith Brainerd, Rigney Cunningham, Karen Delaney, Lynn Eldridge, Jim McCauley, Suzanne Moore, Fran McLennan, Peter Trinchero, Al Yance, and myself. Other OPC board members that are present today would be Bob Carruthers and Ann Hannon. In closing, I'd like to read a comment from a Bowling Pond neighbor. It was written on her RSVP card. It provides the context for our purpose here today, and it said, "We have owned a cottage on the pond for over 35 years and have seen the deterioration of the water due to construction all around and the use of fertilizers. Please let us do something to save the pond." We know if we take no action, the pond's going to degrade. The effort today was founded on the belief that by all of us working together, we can make the pond better. Now, after a short presentation to understand the unique challenges facing Cape Cod freshwater ponds and provide overview of our plan to improve Bowling Pond, and we have speakers Carolyn Kennedy from the chair of the Orleans Marine and Freshwater Quality Task Force, and then we have Sandy Bain, OPC Vice President and Chair of the Pond Protection Committee. Questions will be after the presentation. Thank you very much. Carol.
Thank you, Jim. I'm not sure which microphone I should use here.
It's fine.
That was good.
This one work?
That was working fine.
All right, we know this one won't run out of batteries. And are you doing the slide advancement? Okay, great. Okay, this last year, the Water Quality Task Force, which is a town committee, decided that it really wanted to work on Bowling Pond. And then Orleans Pond Coalition joined us in that effort. So this is really a combination that we have not put together in this way before. Anyway, I'm going to go to the first one. Okay. I thought we might start with some really basic stuff here. In this town, the word watershed is used in many ways which probably aren't very appropriate. We talk about the watershed as being the area where our wellhead is for our drinking water, which really isn't a watershed. It's just, I don't know where in this town that area was at one point named watershed, but I really don't think it is a watershed. It's simply an area where the town water supply wells are located. A watershed is an area that all drains into one river, lake, or ocean area. What's really unique to Cape Cod is we have what are called kettle ponds. These were formed more than 10,000 years ago when the glacier that came down and formed Cape Cod retreated. And when it retreated very slowly, chunks of ice were left behind. And those chunks of ice were so large that they now formed what we call Crystal Lake, Baker's Pond, Pilgrim Lake, and so on. So there were chunks of ice that were embedded in all the sand and gravel that was left by this glacier. Most of them don't have exits or streams coming into them, although some do. The ponds like Aries probably are also kettle ponds. At some point, the land on which we sit was depressed by the glacier and then rose again, and so some of those inlet and outlet streams were formed. So in this illustration, looks like a lot more elevation than we really have here, because Cape Cod is pretty flat. But if we think of this as a kettle pond, the area draining into that pond is probably in here, and this whole area then might be a watershed coming into this particular body of water. What's unique to Cape Cod is the fact that we have this very loose sand underneath us rather than granite as you have under Manhattan or shale that you might have under some other area. And so not only is it the water that runs off the surface, but it's the water running underground that intersects these ponds. So we talk about our ponds as being a window on the groundwater that's underneath them. Okay, I think we can flip. So we need to think about these freshwater ponds as having a life cycle and a lifetime. They were formed 10,000 years ago. Since then, plants, animals, and so on have come to occupy them and form their own biotic communities. And so everything that falls into this pond, because there are no outlets to most of these ponds, really has no way to escape. So the nutrients that come to the pond stay in the pond. There are cycles that allow the nitrogen to get out of the pond, but the phosphorus for the most part stays there. So as we add more and more nutrients, and we'll talk about some of the sources for those, to this pond, it becomes more and more enriched. It's like adding fertilizer to your garden. More and more plants, as there's more and more as there's more and more fertilizer there in the form of phosphorus, more and more plants can grow. And as decay happens and the bottom fills up, this gets more and more shallow, and the kinds of plants that once grew along the shorelines can then grow further out into the pond. Very typical of water lilies, for example. So where you see a water lily now, it's probably no more than 4 feet deep. And as this fills in, those water lilies are going to march their way across toward the middle, depending how deep that pond is. So ponds are great recyclers of much that falls into them. And we have terms for ponds that have very little going on in them, and we have a term for a pond that is filling in to the extent that it's becoming a marsh without a pond, and we call that process eutrophication. So this illustration is meant to show some of the kinds of things that happen to a pond during its life cycle. And some of these are typical of Cape Cod, some of them are not. Obviously, we don't have much in the way of industries. We don't have a whole lot in the way of farms, which are a problem. I don't know whether you've read recently about Lake Erie and the algae that's changing the nature of the water they drink, but that's coming primarily from farms. We have lots of natural runoff. We have, although we don't have a sewage treatment plant, we each have one in our yards, and each one of those is slowly seeping water toward the nearest body of water, whether it's a freshwater pond or an estuary. We certainly have lots of roads and parking lots and so on, all of which drain towards one of our ponds or estuaries. Okay. So we put together, the Orleans Pond Coalition put together a map like this, which was included in our blue pages that we produced about 8 years ago. This is an updated version of that map, and we tried to look at what was happening to various and sundry ponds over the last 10 years. Last couple of years we've spent looking at Cedar Pond up here and its problems, and produced a management plan for that. And so we decided this year to look at another pond, and there are other groups working on other ponds. Boland, which sits right here, seemed like a pond in the middle of this community. It's literally a stone's throw from this building. And we've seen a degradation in it along with several other ponds, so we decided maybe it was one that we should concentrate some effort on. And the question is, what really is affecting Boland Pond? So we decided one of the things that we would try this time, which we've never done before, is to look specifically at the runoff that goes into that pond. So in order to do this, we needed to identify what the watershed looks like. Here's Boland Pond. We're sitting off over here. The watershed, defined by the groundwater that's flowing toward this pond, comes way back here over Eldridge Parkway, back over to Nickerson Road, back out through the baseball field out here, and just lips the pond. So the groundwater flow here is from back here in this direction, and it joins with other flow going this direction that's headed to Town Cove. So happens in this watershed and along this axis affects ultimately both Bowland Pond and Town Cove. What's interesting about this particular pond, and is true in other places in our town, is we've now identified where it is that stormwater goes and comes from. So we've identified all the stormwater basins in this area, and there are several up in this area that actually take stormwater and send it back toward Bowland Pond. If they weren't, the pipes were not piped in that direction, it would head towards Town Cove. What happens with phosphorus in particular is that it's readily absorbed by the soil and readily used by ponds as a fertilizer. So we've actually sort of extended the size of this watershed by taking all of these stormwater pipes and piping them into the pond. This is true along 6A, which is a mass highway road, obviously. Brewster Crossroads, across it here, has some pipes that are headed that direction, and others coming from the business area in here headed this way. Some of them are also headed onto Town Cove. So we've never really looked at stormwater as it affects a particular pond before. We've been testing in this pond for over 10 years. Our usual test site is to go out here to the deepest spot in the pond and do samples down through the layers of the pond, but we decided in this case it really would be interesting to figure out what the components of the stormwater are and its volume, and see if we could figure out what that impact is. What's also interesting about this particular watershed is probably different from, well, it is different from any other in town, in that you have schools, fire department, residential areas, business component, some natural areas right along the edge of the pond, but there's just a tremendous number of different things going on in this watershed, and which really truly makes it unique. If you have never been to Bowland Pond and you want to get there, you could go right down the back of the parking lot at the middle school, or you could go in this area over here, which is owned by the Orleans Conservation Trust. There's a meadow there and a bench, so you can sit and look at Bowland Pond. Those are the two primary access spots, and most of the viewing from the residences on this side here. So it's also interesting to go back, and we've looked at some old aerial views of Bowland Pond, and its shape kind of makes me a little curious as to its origins, because it really is not sort of round as many kettle ponds are. And it's a very shallow area up in here, so I'm not sure whether at some point this was used for a cranberry bog, somebody may know better than I, or whether there's been a tremendous amount of sediment coming in from various and sundry locations that's settled in there. It provides an island, the wildlife like it, for the Canada geese and whatever nest in that area, lots of different red-winged blackbirds and so on. So it does make it rather unique. And I'm just showing you a couple of series of photographs here, but you can see that this island is smaller here, larger here, and in some cases, in some photographs we have, this is entirely filled in with vegetation when algae blooms occurred. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, and she's going to talk about some of the ways we could do something about all that.
Qualifications for being a speaker today is that you're hoarse. You'll find that's running through the meeting. Sorry about that. We want to talk a little bit about the mission of the Pond Protection Committee of the OPC. We were founded a couple of years ago when we realized that out of necessity, Orleans Pond Coalition was really working hard on wastewater management issues, specifically saltwater management issues. And so we felt that the ponds, the freshwater ponds, were somewhat being ignored. So we decided it was time to start a committee that would focus on freshwater. So now, while your lengthy, ongoing wastewater planning process is still going on, we thought there's things we can do now. There's things we can begin to do before we get those answers to that long process. We can determine if there are other sources of phosphorus other than septic systems, which could be avoided or modified to prevent pollution of ponds. An example of this goal is in this picture. This is a rain garden, and it's a very simple garden that intercepts runoff from roads, from your roof, from your drains off your roof, from parking lots. It can be used to slow down and the flow of water, and the roots in that rain garden will filter the water so that some of the pollutants are removed. It's very easy to do. I could have chosen several pictures of ladies, perhaps garden clubs, I don't know, working on this. This is not a muscle job. So it's one of the things we know that can work. It could be composed entirely of native plants, which would be a bonus. We also want to motivate the watershed-based thinking so necessary in water quality issues and to what's so necessary in wastewater planning. We are hearing over and over from the state, from the county, from our wastewater planners that we need to start thinking watershed-based. We find that people will point to the abutters around the pond, the immediate abutters, and look at the big green lawns that are sometimes there and say it's their fault. Well, it's everybody in that watershed who is contributing, so we need to make changes throughout the watershed if we have a problem. And last, we want to involve the next generation. We know this is a very long-term problem. Phosphorus travels very slowly, and the problem will be there for a very long time. So we need to get that next generation motivated, and we're working on that, and I think we're succeeding. We'll hear later from the principal at the middle school and from one of the science teachers. And last, we hope that we can learn something at this pond that we can then take and use on another degraded pond, some commonality, whether it's how to organize the community or other things that we can then take it and use it again. And maybe in Eastham, even, maybe in Brewster. Okay, Jim. So why did we choose Bowling Pond? You've heard some of this from Carolyn. The concerns of the abutters have been outspoken. We listened to them. We have heard from the Water Quality Task Force, as you have. So that is motivating us. And as Carolyn said, it's a central location. It's right in the middle of town. You can see both the degradation and you can see the improvement when it happens. So it's a very obvious place. As she mentioned, the watershed includes a wide variety of stakeholders, provides education for children, and we're hoping to learn more about its history. We've learned a little, and we're hoping people like Chris Ramsey and some of you who've lived there forever can tell us more. That would be useful for us to know. Okay, Jim? And I lost my place, sorry about that. So what is PPC doing now? Pond Protection Committee of the Orleans Pond Coalition. It does sound redundant, but because we're focused on freshwater and the board as a whole has had to focus a little bit on saltwater, we got that redundant name. So we are engaging school children. As I said, you will hear from Maxine Minkoff and John Sims, teacher in the science program, how they are using the pond. We are seeking guidance from town boards and committees. We have been to the Conservation Commission. We have been to the Water Quality Task Force, of course. We have been to the Planning Board. I think Chet just walked in. And we have been to the Board of Selectmen to talk about this project. We are participating in sampling pollution from the drains we talked about, Carolyn mentioned to you. That program hasn't started yet. We're hoping to get it off the ground soon. Unlike the pond sampling that we usually do, where we go out in a boat to the deepest part of the pond, in this we are sampling drains that are running off into the pond to see what amount of phosphorus maybe nitrogen and other pollutants might be in them. We are supporting local regulation of phosphorus. You have a bylaw in this town for control of nitrogen fertilizer. That's a terrific thing. Most towns don't have it. Unfortunately, that bylaw does not include phosphorus. It was geared to protecting saltwater, and we need it to be expanded to protect freshwater. So far, the boards we've talked with about it have seemed very supportive, and I think the planning board is going to propose an amendment to the bylaw, or a slightly different bylaw. We're very happy to see that if that comes about, and we'd like you to support it at town meeting if it happens. And we hope today we are starting to organize the foundation of a community-based group. Jim? So it may sound like a big problem. It isn't an insignificant problem, but it's not insurmountable. We feel that everybody benefits when we work together. On the back table, there is a brochure from EPA talking about healthy ponds and healthy home values. And their studies have shown that home values may be increased or protected when people are living on or renting homes on a clean pond. Students are getting to learn about science. We know that we've mentioned this now several times. We're very excited about that. They are the next generation. We need them to be involved. Business people will get to maybe have a much less maintenance on a property. If they are, instead of having to maintain a beautiful green lawn, they may be able to have vegetated buffers, to have rain gardens, things that will help their maintenance be less and their deposit of fertilizer into the wetland be more. Recreational users may see a greater variety of fish. Kayakers may see that their paddles aren't fouled by algae as they try to paddle across the pond. Certainly in East End, we've done some work on ponds, on pond restoration. The fishermen and the kayakers are very happy because they are no longer having their lines fouled either. And the town itself, again, going back to the wastewater planning process, if in doing this we can show that we have an ability to reduce the sewering or other treatment, whatever it is the town's going to choose to do, whatever wastewater treatment it is, if we can show that producing less phosphorus into the pond can help us reduce the amount of sewering, we will have saved quite a bit of money. And the pond itself is an ecology. It is a system. It counts for itself, not just for how we use it or what we care about. As Carolyn showed you in those earlier slides, the natural process takes a long, long time, centuries, to go from lifeless oligotrophic ponds to a eutrophied pond. We have sped it up by just living around it and loving it. And we're hoping to find a way to slow that process down. And if so, then the natural colonies of plants and animals that are there will have a longer time to adapt to what is happening to them. And Jim? So right now, if you leave here with nothing else, if we don't get a group started, which I know we're going to do, here are the 9 things you can do to keep phosphorus out of the ponds. And we're not going to go through them. They're on that poster back there. They're in your handouts. But we're hoping that everybody here today can commit to doing just one of them. Start with one. Okay, Jim? All right, so we've talked enough. It's time for you. We would like you to tell us what you think, to tell us where we should go from here. Tell us what your background is, what your association is. We have people here from various departments who can help answer questions. But we want to know what you think, what you've observed, what can you tell us? What would you like to see happen? And we're going to make notes right here. Brittany, are you? Yeah. We planned this a long time, but sometimes we mixed our signals.
I was taking notes.
You were taking notes. Good. All right, so anybody? Susan Bauer.
Hi, I'm Susan Bauer. I'm oddly enough of North Falmouth, but I was of Chatham, and my interest is in maintaining habitat for turtles. I am the turtle lady who writes about the Turtle Sisters. My question is that if we are, in your wonderful work, if you are trying to slow down a natural process, that means that the natural process of eutrophication will continue. How are you going to get a significant, quote, improvement if in fact we're just slowing down what is going to happen anyway, and Bowling Pond will eventually become a marsh?
Good question. This project is to begin it's a long process. We looked at Cedar Pond, for example, for several years, did a number of studies in it before we came up with a management plan last year, which we submitted to the Board of Selectmen and they approved. We are just beginning that process with this. So there's a long way to go. There's a lot more we need to know about this pond and what we might do for it. But we certainly know that one of the things we can do is to slow down the process that's speeded up by human beings if we take some of those steps. So what we're doing is adding years and years and years, hastening by years and years and years, the demise of that pond by what we're doing. So the question is what we can do to help slow it down. And as we study the pond more, find out where the nutrients are coming from, we know that some are within the pond and there are ways you can do something about that. But what more are being added to the pond each year, we don't know. We don't know exactly the sources nor the volumes, and that's what we intend to find out with this new study.
But you're not rolling it back, you're simply slowing it down. So why would you say that fishermen and other people see less weed and stuff? Because that would be really reversing it. I think if you're just slowing it down, then the Bowling Pond you've got today is hopefully the same Bowling Pond you'll have 100 years from now, rather than a marsh. But you expect to see real improvement in water quality and in oxygen for fish?
I think there's some possibilities, yes. One of the things that's unique about this pond, although it's about 22, 24 feet deep, is that the bottom is the coldest of any pond in all of town, including the big ones like Crystal Lake and Baker's Pond, Baker's Pond is like 60 feet deep. So why is it so cold? To me, it means that there's a direct stream of probably groundwater coming into it, which you'd think would be relatively clean. But that pond, over the last 10 years that I've been studying it, has significantly degraded in its bottom layers. So there's obviously more and more stuff coming in and settling in there, and more nutrients. And what happens is when the pond temperature and dissolved oxygen go down, 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 the dissolved oxygen plays a part in the recycling of nitrogen and phosphorus. And when the dissolved oxygen gets very low, as it is now doing in the bottom of that pond, more and more nutrients are released into the pond. So there's a whole dynamic play between temperature, dissolved oxygen, and the nutrients in the sediment. There are ways to do something about that, but that is a choice that we'll make many, many years from now, not soon. But there are ways to change what's happening in a pond if you choose to manage it. We have not made that choice yet. We need some more facts before we can do that.
And the other thing that I would say, non-scientist, is we are on a process of discovery. We are trying to understand. We hope together we'll work on that process and learn a lot.
Thanks.
Welcome, Susan.
How about some letters? How about some watershed people? What would you like to see? What have you observed? Anyone? It's not a large group of watershed people here today. Judy, come on, tell us. And we know that you know. What you think?
Thank you. We've lived there 7 years, and one of the new condominiums were put around the pond, and we've just seen it close up continually. Each year, I notice that we have more scuds on the pond, that we have more recovery. Where the first years we had quite a few ducks in the pond. They aren't there anymore. We do have a swan, which I know I'm not supposed to love, but I do, who comes and has babies there, and then our big turtle eats the babies, and we're all sad, and the swans go away. But that's the biggest life cycle thing we see there.
Anyone else? Who else lives there and knows about this pond and can tell us what they'd like to see? Anyone?
I live on the pond, and I just love it. And I've seen such a big difference in it since I've been there for 7 years also. And I think of myself, and I do put oxygen and whatever things are supposed to go in the pond. I water my plants, and I put fertilizer on them. And it's something that I'm going to stop. So I'll do a little bit myself. That's all I can do. But I do. I love what you're doing. It's going to be wonderful. I know it's going to take a while, but it will be fine. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? I should mention, by the way, Jim managed not to name Suzanne Moore, who was on our board, sitting over there next to Judith Bruce. Yes, please.
No, I'm just a little confused about the meeting. I thought we were coming to find out how we could help. And I'm just thinking that all you're doing now is testing.
We are doing several things now. Testing hasn't begun yet, but we plan to be doing it as soon as we can. There are some hitches on that. But one very important thing that we're doing is trying to get a community going, because this will not sustain itself without the people who live in that watershed becoming involved. So that's one of the points of the meeting today. And we are introducing, just briefly, like this introduction of rain garden concept, some things that can be done in that list of things you can do. Some things you can start doing right now without even having gotten this group together. These are things individuals can do. So we want your feedback. We want you to tell us what you'd like to see happen. We have some ideas and we'll go on to those, but we want to hear from you first.
Yeah, I'm wondering, since we have a representative here from the highway department, what's your policy on these drains and whatnot? Is it changing, or are you looking at this to perhaps install better systems and so on?
I'm Tom Daly, Director of Public Works. Thank you, Tom Daly, Director of Public Works. Policy on drains. It's ever-changing. I mean, I've been doing engineering design for, say, 30 years or so. Design standards have changed over the years. Back in the mid-90s, DEP came up with some stormwater management regulations, which is a huge step forward. I mean, for years, we were just designing for quantity. It had nothing to do with quality at all. Basically, get it off the highway. It was a public safety issue. Put it in a pipe, get it out of the way, and dump it into a water body somewhere. That's the most efficient way of dealing with it from a public safety standpoint. But yet, things have changed dramatically. Now, as we're moving, the town very smartly is funding money every year to look at water quality projects. And so this particular town has been doing a significant amount of water quality projects, probably since the early 90s. I've only been here about a year and a half myself, but I know this town is doing fantastic work moving forward. But the criteria is also changing. I mean, in the early 90s, it was sediment and bacteria, which was a major problem. Now we're looking at what phosphorus and nitrogen and other nutrients. So that totally changes the game and totally changes how you're going to deal with some of these issues. And some of these issues are extremely costly. So yeah, we are looking at it as we move forward on projects. We got one drainage project wrapping up. Actually wrapped up, I would say, substantially last fall with some stormwater quality. We have a project right now that is substantially complete in different locations in town, which also has stormwater quality aspects. We've got another one moving forward this fall. So we are incorporating the improvements, best management practices into these projects as we go forward. And we're doing all the things we're supposed to be doing, like clean catch basins every year, street sweeping, which is very important to control nutrients going into water bodies. So it is ever-changing and ever will continue to change. And I will say Orleans in general is on the curve pretty far compared to other municipalities. So. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Fran?
Tom, I wonder if you would discuss some of the challenges in terms of removing nutrients as opposed to pathogens and other things from our wastewater.
There's always one big challenge, and that's money. That's my primary challenge. From the standpoint of what it takes to do it, the other part of that is land area. To get rid of, sediment and pathogens, we can put some leaching pits, et cetera, and be done with it for a few $1,000s a basin, things like that, say 5, things like that. We can do very low cost, and that's what we've been primarily doing. I mean, we've done some sand filters and things like that around town, which cost a bit more. But we wrapped up a preliminary stormwater assessment earlier this year, and one of the things the committee looked at with the stormwater assessment was, let's look at nitrogen removal, what's that going to cost? So we took a sample outfall, and we thought we had a great location. We had a piece of town property that we thought would be big enough that we could do some kind of vegetative wetland, man-made wetland, whatever, to deal with the nitrogen issues. So we said, okay, let's use this as a sample as part of our study. So we took this one location and ran the numbers at it. It was a large watershed, trying to deliver 100 and something pounds of nitrogen a year, went into the pond that it was discharging to, and then we said, okay, based upon this much nitrogen, how big of a treatment system do we need to deal with that? So we came up with 25,000 square feet. But that 25,000 square feet only dealt with half of the nitrogen and only treated 57.5 pounds per year of nitrogen going to this pond. And then when we find out the town property adjacent wasn't big enough to handle a 25,000 square foot. So now let's go into a private property. So now you're looking at property acquisition, construction, and then by the way, based upon the numbers and all the studies that are going on out there with these different type of systems to treat nutrients, well, it's going to cost you $39,000 a year to maintain it. So we're looking at $500,000, 20-year license, $39,000 a year. It's going to cost us $22,000 per year per pound of nitrogen. That doesn't count buying the land to put it on. So when you start getting into nutrient removal, it's huge. And that's what we're looking at. And what that has done now is it's prompted us, based upon that analysis that we did last year, we're actually in the contract with a consulting firm that has they've done it down in the Chesapeake Bay area where they deal with nutrients quite a bit down there. And we're working with them right now. They throw all the watersheds onto Walwyn's map, and here are all the watersheds, and then you can plug in different BMPs, methods of taking care of different type of nutrients into that, and they'll give you cost estimates and how much, what would be the cost estimates, how much reduction can you anticipate in that particular watershed, to give you a closer view of what is this really going to cost Orleans to deal with nutrients from stormwater side, not anything else, just the stormwater side. So challenges, land area, money, because we don't have the land area within our roadways to do all this stuff.
Tom, may I ask you a question? We're focused on Bowling Pond and freshwater, not saltwater today. What I want to know is we're going to look at 7 drains around Bowling Pond. The main water coming into Bowling Pond from these 7 drains we'll be able to measure. Much of it comes from the state highway, 6A. Do we have any jurisdiction over the runoff all along 6A that's coming into Bowling Pond?
I think the only jurisdiction would be, it'll be possibly enforced maybe through the town through conservation or whatever, if there's a water quality issue. If the testing can show that there's a water quality issue, maybe you can pressure DOT through the Conservation Commission, maybe selectmen, et cetera, but, to see if they can do anything. But it's going to depend on the testing and what's really coming on. And I actually have a question, if I may. Your watershed map. I would like to talk to you later about your watershed map, because you've got groundwater watersheds, you've got a surface water watershed, and I'd like to know how you came to that. And we can do it after our line.
Well, my big question that everybody wants to answer.
Let's hear that.
Well, the groundwater watersheds were determined by the U.S. Geological Survey and SMAS as they were doing our planning for wastewater. So those those have been established for the entire town. Sub-watersheds that go into each pond and each stream, and larger watersheds that go into every one of our estuaries. Actually, if you look at that map back there, you can look at it more closely as you leave. The black lines that lead to and from each of those ponds indicate the groundwater basins that intercept that particular body of water or into which they empty. So think about when you travel on Route 6 toward Orleans from Mid-Cape, you pass over the Bass River, big pond to the north, railroad trestle with a cormorant sitting on it to your right as you're coming east. As you cross that river and enter the lands east of that, there is a big mound of water called a lens under the ground there. That water flows east. It flows under Harwich, Brewster, goes towards Chatham, goes towards Brewster and Orleans. So all of those underground, I won't call them fingers of water, but think of them that way, are headed east and are headed out towards the Atlantic Ocean or Nantucket Sound or Pleasant Bay. So we have like a fan underneath us, and that the water is slowly moving through that underground river, if that's a good image for you, and goes through the bottom of every one of these ponds on its way east. And so in order to figure out how to best accommodate and resolve our wastewater issues, we know that that water carries nitrogen with it, and it carries some phosphorus with it, and all the other things that you and I put down our drains, whatever chemicals, medications, cleaning detergents, whatever it is we use in our homes, is going into our soil and is moving with that. We've had a recent study of the medical kinds of things that are going through Cedar Pond. It's astounding what's going through Cedar Pond. And if it's going through Cedar Pond, it's going through every other one of our ponds too. So if you need a good hit of testosterone or something, go for a swim. Whatever. So these really are lenses on what's happening to our groundwater. So take a look at that map as you leave, figure out where your house is, figure out where the water comes from, where it's going to, and what you add along the way to that accumulation. So that has been mapped over the last, and the maps significantly enhanced and tweaked over the last several years to be as true as we can know them to be.
If I could comment on action and opportunities missed. I'd like, earlier in your discussion, you talked about planning board working on an amendment to our nitrogen or fertilizer control bylaw. And I want to point out that at the end of October, we have a special town meeting. The selectmen have agreed that what the planning board produces will be a warrant article in that special town meeting, which is action opportunity in about 90 days, if you want to think about it, or 85 days. The thing to understand is that if we do not make that change before December 14th, if my memory is correct, we lose the opportunity to ever make that change under existing state legislation. So, planning board is working on something, committee is working on something, Board of Selectmen has agreed, as of this past Wednesday, that whatever it is will be before the town meeting. Town meeting, citizens of Orleans have a chance to make some changes. Now, when we talk about the expense of doing things, everything is expensive. Look around the room, we are all part of the problem. If we fertilize our lawn, we're feeding Bowling Pond or any other pond for that matter with nitrogen or phosphorus. We have the opportunity to correct that ourselves at no cost, other than the fact that we may not have the greenest lawn on the street. Now, I learned a long time ago that if we don't fertilize our lawn, and we don't, right, Frank? I only have to mow it 3 or 4 times a year. And I would much rather be out on the water enjoying Pleasant Bay and everything else than mowing a hilly lawn. So I'm just suggesting that when the planning board has a hearing on this subject, and the Board of Selectmen will have to have a hearing on this subject, there's a possibility the Finance Committee will have to have a hearing on this subject, please listen, go, and support what we have an opportunity to do. Orleans is one of 2 communities on the Cape that has its own fertilizer bylaw, Falmouth and Orleans. The other communities have to operate under provision that was passed by the Cape Cod Commission that has the deadline of December 14th. And if you miss it, you're lost forever. We need to be able to penalize ourselves about using fertilizer, and let's not be afraid to do that. Thank you.
And I think, Judith, maybe the Conservation Commission is going to do something about fertilizer in the setback. Yes.
I have another question for Carolyn. Tom alluded to the amount of nutrients that his study showed going into a pond. When you're looking at these outflow pipes, if 100% of the nutrients are going into the pond, what percentage is represented by those pipes versus like ducks and normal activities?
I don't know that we know the answer to that, although the people have calculated that in the past. The way our wastewater plan was put together, they looked at aerial view, what the surface of the land was, how much was forested, how much was lawns, how much was roofs, how much was parking lots, etc. And there is a common factor that you use for those things. This, we were trying to verify much more specifically for this particular pond what's coming in and what's not. So there's nothing you're going to do about the ducks anyway. The ducks will be the ducks, or the raccoons or whatever.
What the order of magnitude is, like if we stop lawn fertilizer, is that 5% or 45%?
That actually is calculated in the wastewater plan.
Oh, okay.
Tom, you have a quick answer for that one?
Oh, he's leaving it out.
I might add, when the planning board reviewed this question, we were told it's between 7 and 10% as a result of fertilizer, and a big factor there is how many golf courses you have feeding to your water.
You're right on target. Just to jump on that, each watershed or whatever is different depending exactly what's in it based on the watershed. We're looking at a couple of samples here, basically from stormwater contribution. You're looking at, like I had the year 7 to 10, this is what I'm looking at right now, it's 69. So it's right in that ballpark, 69, 7 to 10% of this nitrogen in particular is added via stormwater. Excuse me?
Phosphorus.
I don't have that, I just don't have it that quick. I have to look at it, see if we even have anything.
It's different.
Yeah, it would be different.
I also wanted to mention, and I want to get back to you as well, that we haven't talked much about septic systems, and this question raised that issue. Septic systems are by far the predominant contributor of phosphorus and nitrogen. It's estimated 80% of the nitrogen going into our water bodies is from septic systems. And at this point, though, that there are systems that will remove nitrogen. And we have some of those working, and they work very well. That's the problem for saltwater. We don't yet have an approved system that will take phosphorus out of the septic system, keep it from being deposited. Because phosphorus moves very slowly, there is a very, very long-term effect. We think it's small, not as big as the 80%, but according to George Hoyfelder of the County Board of Health, who runs the test lab at the military reservation, more than half of the phosphorus leaves the leach field, so that we don't know exactly how much gets to the pond. We know it takes a long time, but it's getting there. So let's go back to this group. I'm really wanting to see if we can get some ideas about how to organize, what you'd like to see happen. Let me give you some ideas that we've had. Some ideas for future meetings of the pond group. One of them is presentation from the schools on how the science program can integrate into the ponds, it can integrate the ponds into its curriculum, how that benefits the school and the staff and the watershed dwellers and users. A presentation from Orleans Conservation Trust Director Chris Ramsey on the history of the parcel that OCT owns there, why it's important to protect the pond from their viewpoint, how it was acquired by OCT. There's some really interesting history in that. Workshops on prevention measures. One of them would be a workshop on rain gardens and native plants and vegetated shoreline buffers. Sometimes those interweave, but they're things that can be done relatively cheaply, relatively easily, and will pull phosphorus out of water running off the surface or through drains. Do any of those sound to you like they would be useful follow-ups? What do you think? Yes. All of them? Yes.
Do water hyacinths do that?
Water hyacinths are an introduced species. They're not native. I don't know the answer to whether they might pull nutrients. They do have some kind of feeding structure, so they probably pull some nutrients out. They're not recommended though for use in our ponds because they're introduced species. They're not native.
But they might pull phosphorus.
Yes, yes.
Might do that.
All of the plants that are in there will be doing some of it. Yeah. But thank you. And Pete Trinchero was mentioned before. He didn't stand up. He's one of our our drain samplers. He also worked for the Army Corps of Engineers as a wetland specialist, and I worked with him on other projects. He's so knowledgeable. Yes, Pete.
I don't think you should have mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. That's just a comment regarding the hyacinths. That same idea, you can create these floating islands of plants that are very effective, and they provide cover, and depending upon the plants, that's a useful way. But I don't think the Commonwealth would approve hyacinths. I just had a question. Again, I'm an interloper from the next town up, but this map, as far as I'm concerned, of your watershed is really is very interesting. I'm looking at the way this land is used, and I have no idea where all the drains go, and maybe you all do, but I see tremendous parking lots with possibilities for oil and antifreeze and all sorts of good stuff. I see playing fields, which again, I don't know how those fields are maintained, where the drains go, where the drains from all the hard surfaces go. Have these been all mapped?
Yes.
Okay, so you know where the shopping plaza, where those drains go?
Yes.
And do they go into Bowling Pond?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's very, very interesting, because that will be where the dramatic changes will be. Again, you're not going to turn time back, but slowing things down.
Right. Great. Thank you, Pete.
Yes, actually, there are a great number of drains along the streets that aren't labeled on there. What we try to do is take the ones that actually, we know are pipes that then pipe the water back into Bowling Pond.
Thank you.
Okay, we are near the end of our time.
Sorry.
We want to thank you for coming.
We want to encourage you to come back to our next session where we take up some of these specific issues. We encourage you to talk to the boards in town about the issues of phosphorus going into ponds, as we have been. We have not seen yet Maxine Minkoff from the middle school. I do want to thank Karen Delaney and her committee. Hank is on it. And I don't see Judy and Jane Hussey, who is not here. That's the Education Committee for OVC, and they have been wonderful at connecting us with the schools. So we see a really excellent working together there. Frank?
Could that program be described to us?
We were going to have Maxine do that, and she's supposed to be coming. Can someone else jump in? Karen, can you do it?
Can everyone hear me?
No.
We don't have this
I'll do this very briefly. The middle school, starting last week, started a Science and Technology Institute that has several different components, beginning with a studying water quality throughout the school year in the middle school, but then looking at various ponds around the community, looking at good ponds versus ponds that are distressed. And the students are combining environmental science and technology. And they're learning coding, and they're building robots, submersible robots that they can control to actually take water quality samples. And then at the very end of the 3-week program, they're going to do a public service announcement based on what they've discovered. So it's a multi-curriculum course with a water quality component, but also bringing science and technology into the mix, which is what we're going to have to do in the future, and it's a great beginning. So.
Thank you, Karen. All right. It's not a talkative group today, but we thank you for coming. We would like you to hang around for a little while. We have to be out of here cleaned up by 5, but we have some really interesting materials back there. We have town staff here you can talk with individually, committee members you can talk with individually. We'd like you to fill out this card, which you have in your packet, if you will. It'll help us understand who you are and what you're interested in. And would you please put on that card, if you'd like to come to some of your future meetings, put on a day of the week and a time that would be helpful for you if we scheduled it then. I ask you to stay around. I want to introduce one more person, Peter Johnson of the Brewster Conservation Trust. And I know very involved in Brewster's water issues, pond water issues. We have an article back on the table about the closure of Cliff Pond because of the potential for toxic algae, which are blue-green algae. Back there is a brochure on from the State Department of Health about that problem. This is Maxine Bridge. The brochure describes the problem and tells us what to look for. It's a concern in Bristol, it's a concern here. A couple of our ponds have been closed in Orleans for the potential of this blue-green algae, and 2 have closed in Eastham as well. They're usually temporary closures, but these algae can be toxic. Some dogs have died and toxic to humans as well. So that's one of the pieces we have there. We also have a 3D watershed model, so that if this flat picture doesn't help you, this model may help you envision what a watershed, generic watershed looks like. So here's Maxine Finkel, who can maybe tell us just a little. Karen just did do a little bit of introduction, but could you tell us just a little about what you're doing?
Well, we're in the midst of a very exciting program at the middle school. It's a 3-week program for students who are just coming into the middle school or are leaving the middle school. And the first week, the students learned about coding for application. So basically, and they built Lego robots and did some games on water quality and pollution, and then had to code and program the robots so that they could go around this green town and help make it greener. And what they were learning to do basically was to operate the robots through technology while using it to deal with issues around pollution and water quality. This week, the kids are making underwater robots, remote controlled. I guess they're not really called robots, but that's, yeah, submarines, right? I was down there today, and there were 14 kids today, very busily at work, building these robots. We have a huge tank that once these are built, they're going to be tested in the tank, and obviously these are being programmed so the kids can direct, and they're going to have cameras on them so that they can collect data on the water at different sites, through underwater cameras and other cameras as well. But once they know that these work and they can collect data, next week they're going to be going to a couple of different locations, ponds, and actually taking the robots and collecting data on water quality and using those to develop public service announcements through video that will show on water quality issues. So what we're trying to do is integrate students learning the latest technologies and using those around conservation issues, and particularly around water quality.
This is about the Bowling Pond project today, so what is your hope as a principal of the middle school for the Bowling Pond?
I hope we can be a partner, an active partner, and that the kids could start using what they're learning now and applying it there. And we get more and more children involved. And then what we also do is try to make an outside school. Really take full advantage of having the pond in terms of students learning about how to clean it, then maintain it, and use it, do a nature trail around it, so that, and tie it into the greenhouse that is currently being built, which will be up by the, yes, should be up by the end of the month or beginning of September, and tie it together with deciduous plants and do some real research on what kinds of soil, what kinds of water help our earth grow, help our plants grow, and keep us healthy. So we're trying to put it all together. Thank you.
All right. We will now close the meeting. If you fill out the card, terrific. But we'd love to have you stay and talk with your town board representatives. Dan Connolly is here, who is the tree warden, and who has some ideas about, Dan, you are thinking about being able to clear trails so that kids can get down to the pond?
Yeah, we're going to try to utilize America's help with the forest system and control invasives, which would help pond health. We've done so in the past in other places, as long as time, so.
And we always need to remember, as we're doing all these things, that we do need to talk with the Conservation Commission when we are talking and working within 100 feet of the wetland. So talk with your board members, talk with us, talk with Peter Johnson, see what Brewster's doing, and we thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye.